Welcome to Truth Behind History, where we uncover the hidden forces that shape the past. Today, we're diving deep into the rise and reign of one of history's most legendary figures, Julius Caesar. From cunning political maneuvers to brutal military campaigns, and from betrayal to his shocking assassination, Caesar's story is one of ambition, power, and ultimately, downfall. But was he a brilliant strategist or a ruthless dictator? Did he strengthen Rome, or did he set the Republic on a path to destruction? By the end of this video, you'll have a much clearer picture of how one man changed the course of history forever. Let's start by looking at how Caesar rose to power, because he didn't just get lucky. He played the game of politics like a master, making alliances, securing military command, and even using propaganda to shape his public image. Julius Caesar was not born into absolute power. He had to fight for it, scheme for it, and play the political game better than anyone else in Rome. And he did just that. First, let's talk about his political maneuvers. In 60 BCE, Caesar formed what is known as the First Triumvirate, a secret alliance between himself, the powerful general Pompey, and the insanely wealthy Crassus. Now, this wasn't some official government body. It was essentially a backroom deal between three of Rome's most powerful men who realized they could dominate Roman politics if they worked together. Caesar brought his popularity, Pompey brought military influence, and Crassus brought the money. This was a power move that gave Caesar the leverage he needed to climb the political ladder. But alliances aren't just about getting into power, they're about keeping it. That's where exploiting alliances comes into play. The triumvirate wasn't just a casual agreement, it was a calculated strategy. Through this alliance, Caesar secured his appointment as governor of Gaul, which gave him command over a massive army. Pompey, in return, got land reforms that benefited his soldiers, and Crassus, well, Crassus got financial advantages that strengthened his business interests. Everybody got something they wanted, at least for a while. Of course, power isn't just about what you do, it's also about how people perceive you. And Caesar was a master of propaganda. While conquering Gaul, he didn't just lead battles, he wrote about them. His work, Commentarii de Bello Gallico, which translates to Commentaries on the Gallic War, wasn't some dry military report. It was a gripping, first-person account of his own achievements, painting him as a heroic leader bringing glory to Rome. He knew that if he controlled the narrative, he could control public opinion. And it worked. His writings made him a household name and built his reputation among the Roman people. This combination of political maneuvering, strategic alliances, and masterful propaganda put Caesar on the path to ultimate power. But military success was the key to securing his dominance. And that takes us to the next part of his journey, his brutal conquest of Gaul. Julius Caesar knew that political power in Rome was closely tied to military success. The more land you conquered, the more wealth and glory you brought back to Rome, and the more your name echoed through the streets. His time in Gaul wasn't just about expanding Rome's borders, it was about securing his legacy. Between 58 and 50 BCE, Caesar led a series of brutal military campaigns in Gaul, a vast region that includes modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Germany. At the time, Gaul was a patchwork of independent tribes, each with its own leaders and warriors. These tribes weren't just going to roll over and accept Roman rule. They fought back fiercely, and Caesar had to employ every trick in the book to defeat them. One of his greatest strengths was his battle strategy. Caesar didn't fight like a traditional Roman general, he fought like a tactician. He used rapid marches to cover incredible distances in short amounts of time, catching his enemies off guard. He built fortifications at lightning speed, forcing opponents into unfavorable positions. And when it came to fighting, he didn't just rely on brute strength, he used psychological warfare. One of his go-to tactics was to divide and conquer, turning different Gallic tribes against each other before striking. One of his most famous victories came against the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix, who united the tribes in a last-ditch effort to stop Roman expansion. The final showdown happened at the Siege of Alesia in 52 BCE. Caesar's forces surrounded the city and built a wall to trap the Gauls inside. But then, a massive Gallic relief force arrived to break the siege. So what did Caesar do? He built another wall, this time facing outward, to trap the reinforcements. The result? Vercingetorix surrendered, and Gaul was officially under Roman control. But victory came at a massive human cost. Caesar claimed that over 1 million Gauls were killed in his campaigns, though modern historians debate this number. Regardless of the exact figure, one thing is certain, his conquest of Gaul was one of the bloodiest military campaigns in Roman history. Tens of thousands of people were enslaved, entire tribes were wiped out, and Roman rule was enforced with an iron fist. This conquest made Caesar the most powerful general in Rome, but it also made him dangerous. He had an army that was loyal to him above all else. The Senate in Rome began to worry. What if Caesar decided to use that army against them? Their fears would soon become reality, because in 49 BCE, Julius Caesar made a decision that would change history forever. He marched on Rome. By 49 BCE, Julius Caesar had become too powerful, too popular, and too ambitious for Rome's ruling elite to ignore. The Senate, led by his former ally Pompey, saw him as a threat to the Republic itself. They ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, without his troops. Now, if you know anything about Caesar, you know he wasn't the kind of man to simply give up his power. Instead, he made one of the most legendary decisions in history. He crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act of outright defiance against the Senate. In Roman law, a general bringing troops into Italy was considered an act of war. By doing this, Caesar was essentially saying, "I'm not just coming back to Rome, I'm taking it." What followed was a civil war that tore Rome apart. Caesar's army faced off against Pompey's forces in a series of bloody conflicts. The most decisive battle was the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, where Caesar's outnumbered army pulled off a stunning victory against Pompey. This wasn't just a military triumph, it was a complete political upheaval. With Pompey on the run, Caesar marched into Rome as its undisputed ruler. But Rome was not at peace. The Senate was in chaos, and the Republic was crumbling. Pompey fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated by Pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, hoping to win Caesar's favor. Instead, his death only enraged Caesar, who saw Pompey as a worthy opponent, not a traitor. With no major political rivals left, Caesar became the most powerful man in Rome. But power is a dangerous thing, and the more he gained, the more enemies he made. His next moves would only deepen the divide between him and the Senate, setting the stage for his eventual downfall. Caesar wasn't content with simply winning, he wanted to reshape Rome in his image. And in 44 BCE, he did the unthinkable. He declared himself dictator for life. By 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was no longer just a military leader or a powerful politician, he was the ruler of Rome. But unlike previous Roman dictators, who were given temporary emergency powers, Caesar declared himself dictator for life. This wasn't just a title, it was a direct challenge to Rome's entire system of government. Rome had been a republic for nearly 500 years. Power was supposed to be shared, debated, and checked by the Senate. But Caesar wasn't interested in sharing. He wanted to centralize authority under himself, stripping power from the Senate and ruling with absolute control. One of his first moves was the expansion of the Senate. Now, you might think that meant more voices, more debate, maybe even a fairer system, but no. Caesar increased the number of senators from 600 to 900, packing it with his own loyal supporters. These weren't independent politicians, they were men who owed their careers to Caesar. Instead of a governing body that could challenge him, the Senate became little more than a rubber stamp for his decisions. Then came his judicial reforms. Rome's courts had long been used to balance power, ensuring no one person could dominate. But Caesar wasn't about to leave anything to chance. He restructured the court system to favor his own rulings, ensuring that his decisions became law with little opposition. At this point, it was clear Caesar wasn't just leading Rome. He was transforming it into a dictatorship. To the common people, Caesar was a hero. He had provided land reforms, relieved debt, and thrown lavish public celebrations. But to the Senate, he was a tyrant. Every move he made convinced them that the Republic was slipping away, and if something wasn't done, Rome would never be the same again. A plot was beginning to form, and Caesar, for all his brilliance, never saw the knife coming. Once upon a time, the Roman Senate was the most powerful governing body in the Republic. It debated laws, controlled finances, and checked the power of ambitious generals like Caesar. But by the time he declared himself dictator for life, the Senate was a shadow of its former self. First, there was the reduction of power. Caesar wasn't interested in hearing dissenting voices, so he filled the Senate with his own loyalists. These weren't men who would challenge him, they were men who would support his every move. Instead of a governing body that shaped Rome's future, the Senate became a tool of Caesar's rule. Then, there was the shift in its role. The Senate wasn't governing anymore, it had become nothing more than an advisory body. Instead of debating policies, it merely endorsed whatever Caesar wanted. If he proposed a law, it passed. If he made a decision, it stood. In effect, he had stripped Rome of one of its core institutions and replaced it with a symbolic, powerless assembly. And of course, with power comes prestige, or, in this case, the loss of it. Traditional senators, once the most respected men in Rome, found themselves pushed aside. Their influence was gone, and their voices no longer mattered. Many of them had spent their entire lives believing in the Republic, and now, they were being forced to watch as one man dismantled it before their eyes. To them, this was unacceptable. If Caesar was allowed to continue unchecked, there would be no going back. Rome would no longer be a republic, it would be a monarchy in all but name. The anger was boiling over. The whispers of conspiracy were getting louder, and soon those whispers would turn into action. But Caesar wasn't just making enemies in the Senate, he was also making powerful alliances outside of Rome. And one of those alliances would change history forever. Julius Caesar wasn't just a military genius or a political mastermind, he was also a man who understood the power of relationships. His affairs weren't just personal, they were strategic, and no relationship was more significant than his legendary romance with Cleopatra VII, the Queen of Egypt. Cleopatra was one of the most powerful women of her time, and when she met Caesar in 48 BCE, she was fighting for her own throne. Egypt was in the middle of a brutal power struggle between Cleopatra and her brother husband, Ptolemy XIII. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria, Cleopatra saw her chance to win him over, not just as a lover, but as an ally. And let's be honest, Cleopatra knew how to make an entrance. According to legend, she had herself smuggled into Caesar's palace wrapped inside a rug. When the rug was unrolled, there she was, young, ambitious, and ready to strike a deal. Caesar was captivated. He backed Cleopatra in her fight for the throne, defeated her brother's forces, and secured her rule over Egypt. Their affair was not just about love, it was about power. Together, they had a son named Caesarion, a child Cleopatra saw as a symbol of her connection to Rome. For Cleopatra, this was a way to secure her dynasty. For Caesar, it was an opportunity to expand Rome's influence into Egypt. But not everyone in Rome saw it that way. His political alliances through relationships raised eyebrows, and his affair with Cleopatra was deeply controversial. Romans weren't thrilled about their leader getting entangled with a foreign queen, especially one with ambitions of her own. Rumors swirled that Caesar wanted to move the capital of Rome to Alexandria or even declare himself king, a word that was practically treasonous in the Republic. These fears only added fuel to the fire. Caesar's enemies weren't just worried about his growing power, they now believed he might try to rule Rome like an Egyptian pharaoh. And so, the conspiracy against him began to take shape. His enemies were no longer just concerned senators, they were men who had once been his closest allies. And in Rome, betrayal was deadly. At the height of his power, Julius Caesar seemed unstoppable. He had crushed his enemies, reshaped Rome to his liking, and declared himself dictator for life. But absolute power breeds absolute resentment, and Caesar had made too many enemies, some of whom had once been his closest friends. One of the most infamous figures in this story is Marcus Junius Brutus. Now, Brutus wasn't just some random senator, he had been one of Caesar's protégés, someone the dictator trusted deeply. But that trust would be his downfall. Brutus, along with another key figure, Gaius Cassius Longinus, became convinced that Caesar's rule meant the death of the Republic. They feared he would abolish democracy entirely and declare himself a king. And in Rome, the word king was synonymous with tyranny. This growing paranoia led to the formation of a senatorial conspiracy. Around 60 senators plotted together, believing that assassinating Caesar was the only way to save Rome. These weren't just his enemies, many were men who had once supported him, who had fought alongside him, and who had been elevated to power because of him. But their loyalty to the Republic was stronger than their loyalty to Caesar. And what was their political motivation? It wasn't just about the Republic, it was about self-preservation. Caesar's grip on power was tightening. The Senate had been reduced to a ceremonial body, and every day that passed, their influence faded a little more. If they didn't act soon, they feared there would be nothing left of the Republic to save. And so, the plan was set. They would strike when Caesar least expected it, not on a battlefield, but in the heart of Rome itself, and the day of reckoning would come on the Ides of March. The day was March 15, 44 BCE, the Ides of March, a date that would be forever etched into history. Julius Caesar, at the peak of his power, was about to walk straight into a death trap. There had been warnings. A soothsayer famously told him, "Beware the Ides of March," but Caesar, ever the skeptic, dismissed it. His wife, Calpurnia, had troubling dreams of his assassination and begged him not to go to the Senate that day. Even his personal advisors sensed danger. But Caesar? He laughed it off. He was untouchable, invincible. What could possibly happen to Rome's most powerful man in the halls of its own government? And so, he walked into the Senate chamber, completely unaware that he was surrounded by men who had sworn to kill him. The attack happened in an instant. A senator named Tullius Cimber approached Caesar, pretending to ask for a favor. As Caesar turned him away, Cimber grabbed his toga, signaling the attack. What followed was a brutal ambush. The conspirators stabbed Caesar 23 times, their blades piercing through his body as he struggled to fight back. Blood spilled onto the marble floors of the Senate, staining the heart of the Republic with betrayal. And then came the most famous moment of all. Caesar turned to see Brutus among his assassins. According to legend, his last words were "It too, Brute," meaning even you, Brutus? A heartbreaking realization that even the man he trusted had turned against him. Whether or not those exact words were spoken, the message was clear: Julius Caesar had been betrayed by those closest to him. And with one final gasp, the greatest ruler Rome had ever seen fell at the base of Pompey's statue, a bitter irony, considering Pompey had once been his greatest rival. The senators believed they had saved Rome from a tyrant, but what they didn't realize was that Caesar's death would do the exact opposite. His assassination didn't restore the Republic, it shattered it, and Rome was now on the path to even more chaos, more war, and ultimately, an empire. The conspirators had done it. Julius Caesar was dead. They had plunged their daggers into the heart of tyranny and believed they had saved the Roman Republic. But instead of restoring freedom, they had unleashed absolute chaos. First came the civil wars. The moment Caesar fell, Rome didn't celebrate, it descended into a power struggle. His loyal followers, including his right-hand man Mark Antony and his adopted heir Octavian, saw the assassination as nothing less than murder. The Senate expected the people to rejoice at Caesar's death, but instead, Rome erupted in riots. Caesar had been incredibly popular with the common people, and they wanted revenge. But the real power vacuum came with the rise of the empire. Octavian, later known as Augustus, was young, ambitious, and determined to punish those who had killed his adoptive father. He joined forces with Mark Antony and hunted down the conspirators, crushing them one by one. Brutus and Cassius, the ringleaders of the plot, were ultimately defeated at the Battle of Philippi in 42 BCE. Rather than face capture, they took their own lives. And here's the final irony: the men who killed Caesar to save the Republic ended up destroying it instead. With no one left to challenge him, Octavian became Rome's first emperor, taking absolute control. The Republic was dead, and the age of emperors had begun. Caesar's assassination had changed Rome forever. Instead of preventing tyranny, it had ensured it. And what followed was an era where one man would hold absolute power over the greatest empire in history. Julius Caesar was dead, but his influence was stronger than ever. His assassination wasn't the victory for democracy that his killers had hoped, it was the beginning of the end for the Roman Republic. First, let's talk about how the Republic was undermined. Caesar's actions had already weakened republican institutions before his death. He had centralized power, sidelined the Senate, and made himself dictator for life. Even after he was gone, the damage had been done. Rome couldn't go back to the way things were. The very structure of the Republic had been irreversibly changed, and imperial rule was now inevitable. Then came Augustus' rise. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, was young but incredibly strategic. He understood that Rome was in chaos, and he used that chaos to his advantage. First, he played the role of the Avenger, hunting down Caesar's assassins with Mark Antony. Then, when that was done, he turned on Antony, defeating him at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. With no rivals left, Octavian became Rome's first emperor, taking the title Augustus and marking the official end of the Republic. And finally, we come to Caesar's lasting impact. His rule set the foundation for Roman emperors for the next 500 years. Future leaders would model themselves after him, and his name, Caesar, would become a title for rulers across the world, from the Russian Tsars to the German Kaisers. His ambition may have led to his downfall, but in the end, he shaped not just Rome, but the course of world history. But here's the real question: was Julius Caesar a visionary leader or a ruthless dictator? That's where the historical debate begins. Julius Caesar's legacy is one of the most hotly debated topics in history. Was he a brilliant reformer who changed Rome for the better? Or was he a power-hungry tyrant who destroyed the Republic? Let's break it down. First, the case for Caesar as a reformer. There's no denying that he enacted policies that benefited the poor and restructured governance. He launched land reforms, redistributed wealth, and introduced debt relief measures that helped struggling Romans. He also reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, which was so effective that we still use a version of it today. Many saw him as a champion of the people, a leader who broke the grip of the corrupt Senate and gave power back to the masses. Then, there's the argument that he was a military genius. His conquests expanded Rome's territory, securing vast resources and wealth for the empire. His campaigns in Gaul, his brilliant tactics, and his ability to outmaneuver enemies secured Rome's dominance for generations. Even his enemies respected his battlefield prowess. His military strategies were so effective that leaders from Napoleon to modern generals have studied them. But there's also the other side of the coin: Caesar the tyrant. His critics argue that he dismantled democracy, ruled with absolute authority, and set the stage for the end of the Republic. His declaration as dictator for life was seen as a direct challenge to everything Rome stood for. The Senate wasn't just mad about losing power, they feared that Rome was on the path to monarchy. To them, Caesar wasn't a hero, he was the end of Roman democracy. So, where does the truth lie? The reality is, Caesar was both a visionary and a tyrant. He broke the system to rebuild Rome in his own image. And while his assassination was meant to save the Republic, it did the exact opposite. Which side do you think is right? Was Caesar a hero or a dictator? Either way, his death didn't mark the end of his influence. His ambition, his reforms, and his legacy lived on, reshaping Rome for centuries. But let's take a final look at Caesar's dark truth, the ambition that led him to the top and ultimately sealed his fate. Julius Caesar was a man who stopped at nothing to achieve power. He reshaped Rome, commanded armies, and defied tradition. But in the end, his unrelenting ambition was his undoing. Caesar pursued power at any cost. He wasn't just looking for influence, he wanted total control. From forming secret alliances to manipulating public opinion, he dismantled the safeguards of the Republic one by one. He marched on Rome, defied the Senate, and crowned himself dictator for life. This wasn't the move of a cautious leader, it was the move of someone who believed he was untouchable. But power breeds jealousy and fear. Those who had once supported him turned against him. His unchecked rise led to the ultimate betrayal of murder at the hands of his own allies. His closest friends, the very men who had fought beside him, became his executioners. The assassination wasn't just an act of rebellion, it was a desperate attempt to stop a man who seemed unstoppable. And yet, despite their efforts, Caesar's influence only grew after his death. His lasting influence reshaped Rome forever. The Republic never recovered, and in the years that followed, Rome became an empire. His name, his legacy, and his impact echoed through history. His ambition may have led to his assassination, but his vision of power and rule endured for centuries. Caesar's life is a lesson in power, betrayal, and the cost of ambition. He was both a genius and a tyrant, a man who left behind one of the most complex legacies in history. Conclusion and call to action. So what do you think? Was Julius Caesar a visionary leader who strengthened Rome, or was he a ruthless dictator who destroyed the Republic? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Truth Behind History, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. We've got plenty more fascinating stories from history, so if you love learning about the past, this is the place for you. Check out some of my other videos to keep exploring the past, because as we've seen today, history isn't just about what happened. It's about how it shaped the world we live in today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.